First of all, I want to thank Camille very much for accepting very last minute to show up and give a presentation on this. I'm sorry I did this to a bunch of you, but I have like a nice Belgian chocolate to make for you to forgive me. This is something that was particular. Camille works with Inno³ and Inno³ works with CNLL to release a guide that is really intended at open source manufacturers. I think is the sort of like
Kind of.
But I mean, one of the reasons I really wanted to have Camille here with us today is we focused a lot on maintainers, we focused a lot on open source software stewards, and we focused a lot on how large manufacturers ingest open source, but we really didn't pay that much attention to a really important constituency, especially in Europe. It's the constituency of SMEs who are really open source companies. And I know that your work is broader than this, but I think like it also encompasses this, which we haven't, as I was saying, paid too much attention to. So that's why I'm super excited to have you here. Yeah, the floor is yours, and I'll sort of like walk you through my own questions at the same time, because I know this is last minute, and so I guess, please.
Nice introduction. So briefly, so yeah, it's to present you this short guide that we made for the CNLL. So I don't know if all of you know what the CNLL is. Yeah, who doesn't know what the CNLL is?
No.
Okay, so it's a very French thing. It's a trade association of French companies whose activity is mostly in open source, and so most of the members of the CNLL are small companies. And the second, yeah, sorry.
You're struggling with the.
Oh no, on the contrary, I like it.
It goes the wrong way around.
So yeah, basically that's a small company, and when kissing, as I would say, that they don't have a dedicated legal department, and so they want to be aware of the impact on the series. So I work for Inno³. We're a niche consultancy about open source and stuff. So the objective of the guide was really to clarify for an audience that wasn't really, who hadn't closely followed the whole series story, and they wanted to understand clearly what do they have to do to be ready, because as they were saying, and most of them are actually selling products or services that will be confirmed by the CRA. The idea was also to foster a dialogue with other actors, like people who would be in the digital industry, but who wouldn't be in open source. But as you know, I mean, everybody who actually sells software, also includes open source libraries. So that would be also of interest to basically it. So most of the work was actually to listen to the small companies, to get to know what they were especially worried about, and to provide them with a first understanding of the text. Sorry. So we focused, of course, on the legal text available. That means that of course we don't have a standardization part, which is still going on, and we tried to make it easy to understand with using personas and charts, as I will show you. What is important is that the work has mostly been done in French and translated. So I will show you the result in English, but there might be translation issues. And as there is also in the text of the CRA itself, I don't know if you had the opportunity to compare the different languages of the CRA, but there is some issue here and there. And so the last point was to try to coordinate with the version.
This is us, by the way. I just want to point that out.
So basically, that's an aspect. What we show basic typology of different actors, but I won't say something for that because I'm not all aware of that. But so most of the work we did was trying to have it easily understandable in all the contexts. So we know it was a bit more complex at the start than how simple we managed to do it, because the idea was to have a bit more than just the initial chart that we.
And just, I mean, the guide is publicly available, right? And was linked in the mailing list. I think I added it like yesterday or a couple of days ago, and some other people referenced it in the past. And so you find these like really, really complex but cool graphics in there directly, right?
So yeah, as you know, I mean, the text itself is quite complex, so we couldn't simplify it too much. We try to simplify it as much as possible, and so we also chat like this. I'm not sure it's interesting for me to present them now, but yeah, as Toby said, I mean, the source is available, and that's for us still kind of a work in progress. I mean, that was our first step in doing this guide, and we are waiting now for feedback to know if it actually works, if it's actually understandable by the target audience. And so, yeah, we try to summarize everything in different personas, which are based on the type of members that are part of the CNLL, like hardware manufacturer and stuff like that. And for each, we made a summary, trying to highlight the main points they have to do about it. What to say? Sorry. So basically, that's it. You have the source available if you want to see it in more detail. And I don't know if you have any questions.
So I see hands raised already. Martin, do you want to?
Yeah. Actually, first of all, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for presenting this. This was shared a while back by Stéphane Vermegier.
Yes, exactly. That's
so, and I looked at the English version because unfortunately my French is not great. And I liked it a lot. So I did send him some feedback relating to the diagrams or the decision tree as it relates to open source stewards. Did it ever reach you by any chance?
No, because I'm actually I wasn't completely on this project. I'm just back on the topic now.
Oh, right.
But
okay.
yeah, I mean, I will have a look at this. Yeah.
Okay.
And if, what was your question about open source?
Yeah, I think the decision tree I think the decision tree is very good if you're a manufacturer. I think if you're a steward, I'm not sure if it's fully capturing the various nuances of that super long recital. And I think it would be great if those nice diagrams can also be helpful for stewards, even though I realize CNL is not really catering to stewards necessarily.
I think it's also very important to discuss open source stewards because, for instance, I contribute to a project which is part of the KDE ecosystem. We were discussing with the board, and I was asking them what was their plan about CRI. I say, oh no, we are not open source stewards. And so I say, I think you are.
Right.
And but I mean that showed me that even for cases that were supposed to be really obvious, I mean that's obvious. I think for people who are in this room, but for them, I mean it wasn't that obvious. So I mean I think you're really right. There's also a need for open source steward to have a clear definition.
Right. So I'll try to find the email.
Well, I will ask. But, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. I see also opportunity here. I mean, you, Martin, created this really nice decision tree diagram about whether you'd be in scope or not in scope. The commission also has like something like this. There's this, and I think doing some form of like lightweight work to figure out like what the delta is between these two might be interesting and might point to areas where there's misunderstandings or could end up in FAQs, right? I see you smiling, so I'm kind of curious about like where this is going.
Yeah, so informally, my slide didn't fit, my thing didn't fit on their slide. And I think I got also informally some thumbs up, but they wouldn't give that much detail. So yeah, I guess. I don't think you will ever get more decision tree from the commission, if that's what you're after.
Oh, no, not necessarily. This was more about, if there are multiple decision trees and they are slightly different, it implies that there is slightly different understanding.
Right.
And so sort of like digging to the bottom of where the misunderstanding comes from, or like the different understanding comes from, might be useful and sort of like be fodder for, pointed questions, not to, the goal is not to say, hey, this diagram is better, or the commission gives us a better diagram, though that would be nice. But it's more about, where there's friction, there's like knowledge to be gathered or something like this. That's kind of where I was going with this. And I like diagrams, so like the more diagrams we have, the better it is.
Yeah, about the commission, I mean, they were really nice with us when we asked them questions, but they won't definitely not give you a clear-cut answer. Because, we asked them to say yes, I said, what is the answer? And we can't answer, so we give you evidence, but you draw your own conclusions.
Not on the record anyway.
Yeah, no, it makes a little sense. I mean, we've also heard that answer. So, any other, we chatted and with Benjamin too, about this. He talked a lot about the process, and how that had been was really important. And you also point here to like a mailing list, etc. So I'm kind of curious, if there's a few things that you've learned from the process, or you were not that involved with the process, right?
I'm not the right person.
And so the second part of my question was, what's the future plan for this, and what are you hoping people come through that mailing list to provide or ask, or like essentially going forward, like is this something that's fairly complete, or you're planning to revisit it, like maybe once the standards are there, or what's the idea?
Yeah, I think we definitely have to revisit it and when we have the key element, which is the standard. Also, I mean, for them was the opportunity to make a connection between the work we have done and the work that you have done. And because I think there is a convergence which is logical, I think we should really, I expect to learn a lot by discussing with you and today and next days. So I think that from this element we'll have to make another version.
Wonderful. So yeah, that's great. And I think if there's any way that this community can contribute to that work, or if you can, at some point like come present the new version, or come ask questions, or whatever it is that like we can be useful working together. We'd love to have more of that. Any other questions for Camille on the topic of the guide? Yes? Please.
I'm thinking if it's relevant or not, but I think it's a commentary or a question.
So I love questions that start with like not a question but a comment. So I'll stay close to you.
I can rip the microphone away from you.
Yes, absolutely.
There's one point of clarity I'm kind of detecting that we might want to explore a little, and that's the stewardship that we're talking about there. I'm thinking there's, strictly speaking, several types of stewards that we should be explicit about. What kind of stewards are we talking about? This is it could be a business, a single project business, it could be an ecosystem, it could be a foundation, it could be something else. And then consistently distinguish between these types in the guidelines and facts and documentation we are writing now in the coming time. And I think that would help a lot for creating clarity. So that's my comment.
Yeah, no, I think that's very relevant because I think generally we consider, open source too broadly without, considering that the reality is much more complex because it's not the same business model behind it or maintenance of that extra. So yeah, I think that would be interesting. And that's a bit of the spirit that we try to do, that we have the categories of the CRA and you have categories in the, I would say, in the realities. For instance, because naturally, a company will say, okay, I'm an integrator. I'm not sure the translation is integrator. They won't come, that's a manufacturer, but in some cases they could be considered extra. So I think matching finer grained categories of open source like this to CRA categories in the topic of the open source stewards, that would be very relevant here.
Yeah, and I think it's actually interesting that you bring that up because one of the things I really like in the guide is the personas that they've built, which kind of like address this, or as you were saying, address this for like specific kinds of manufacturers. Like if you're doing this and that, like what how do you fit, right? And so I think like it would make sense to extend the same model to stewards and also possibly the maintainers. That might also be something that could be interesting to think about. A maintainer that does these different things, like what is it? Like is it is it a hobbyist or is it like a manufacturer, for example, right? And I think the commission is actually quite interested in actually seeing personas like this, and potentially helping clarify what they're what that means for them. Martin had their hand up, right? No longer.
I found it, so if you are interested and want to hear about it, I can
Oh.
list what I had, what the feedback was again. I'm not sure if that's interesting, otherwise.
Well, we're gonna have to give the feedback and then we'll have to find out.
Yeah, so I think in the description of the steward, there's language about control in your description. And I think that might have been written around the time of the trialogue, or people that wrote it had their minds on the trialogue, because there was a definition of the steward during the trialogue that had this notion of control in it. And in the final text, they got rid of that. So I think that piece of the guide needs a look, because I think that has changed in the CRA process. And it no longer, there's no longer this concept that the steward has control or does not have control or whatever. That's, well, they cut that out, supposedly with a reason. So that's the bit which I commented on. I'm not sure if that reached the right people.
No, but that's not interesting yet. Also because we know that the evolution of the text is also, I think it's interesting even for the future. But to make the connection with the remark, I think that we for open source stewards, we should take simple example like 501c3 versus a 501c6 and stuff like that, because we know it's different, and so we should see how this difference actually reflect with regard to the obligation of the CRA.
I guess it also connects with Salve's point about different types of stewards.
Yeah,
It has a very specific focus on the Eclipse model right now, and I think stewards is broader than just Eclipse use case.
Thank you for this conversation. I think this is super useful. Yeah, and I mean, it's quite clear that the go-to, and this is why I'm super happy to have Camille here, right? Which is when you start thinking about the CRA, the go-to is you figure out like the large models that you're familiar with, and like you're like, oh, okay, like a manufacturer is like someone who uses open source and uses it in products. Like, that's easy. Then you're like, oh, an open source steward, well, that's a foundation. That's easy, right? And like a hobbyist, well, that's like everyone else, right? And that's easy too. And then that's, you start digging into it and like, oh, but what about this use case? What about a manufacturer that like has an open source project?
What about, a steward that is a manufacturer but of a different project? All of these different like complexities, like that's kind of like where we're at right now. So I think it's like very healthy that we had these like very large, high level models to sort of like think through the early steps. And now we can dig into, deeper and like leverages things like those personas, to think about this.
Yeah.
I think we can take like one last question and then we can pretty much go to the wrap up. So any last question for Camille? Hearing none. Any last comment for Camille?
Yeah, wonderful document.
Oh, beautiful, thank you. On these great last words, thank you very much.